Welcome to One Cool Story, Tales from the University of Oregon's School of Journalism and Communication. I'm your host, Julia Boboc, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another season of the podcast. You've probably heard the news that the SOJC has a new dean in town. But who really is Regina Lawrence? Well, for one, she's a cat person, but don't tell her dog that. In this episode, I sat down with Lawrence to talk about her early life plans of becoming a professional singer, the incredible research she's done in the field of political communication, and her journey to the SOJC. And it was quite the journey indeed. Hi, Regina. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are super excited to have you on the podcast today. I just thought we could start with you just introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
You bet. Regina Lawrence. I'm serving as the interim dean this year of the SOJC, which is very exciting. And I've been with the SOJC for about a decade. And I've been based in Portland that whole time, where I've been the associate dean for the SOJC in Portland.
Perfect. Well, I thought that we might warm up a little bit. We don't usually do this. It's a special circumstance, but I thought we might warm up a little bit to get to know you. Okay. So I have some speed round questions that I thought we could go through. Okay. Are you ready?
I guess. Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's do it. Are you a cat or a dog person?
Oh my, don't tell my dog, but I think I'm actually a cat person.
Do you have any cats?
I have a cat and a dog. That's why I said don't tell my dog that actually, if I had to choose.
Okay. If you could write a book about anything, you have many books on many subjects. What would you write it about?
Oh my gosh, I'd write about movies.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just
I love movies. I love film. Some days I think maybe I missed my calling. I'm fascinated by just the craft of the storytelling and all the different elements, the direction, the art design, the acting, the music, the way it all fits together.
Absolutely. We've talked about how you really fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. What is your favorite spot to visit?
Ooh, it'd be hard for me to choose just one, but one would be obviously the Oregon coast, especially around the Manzanita area. It's a place that we try to get to a few times a year, and it's just magically beautiful. But also a place we go every year is the Lower Falls on the Lewis River in Washington State, and it's just this spectacular set of waterfalls, beautiful trail, beautiful camping, and that's kind of one of my favorite spots.
Gorgeous. After a long day of work, which I assume has been most days of work this term for you, what do you do to decompress?
Movies. Movies, Netflix. Yeah, it's my favorite thing to do at the end of the day.
What's the most recent movie you watched?
Well, movie-wise, I'm having trouble remembering, but I'm right in the middle right now of Black Rabbit.
Oh.
A Netflix series, Jason Bateman, Jude Law. Fantastic. So good.
That's on my list for sure. What's your go-to karaoke song?
Do I look to you like a person who does karaoke?
Well, we talked about you singing, and I thought, hey, maybe.
Never have done karaoke. Don't have a go-to song.
Maybe at an SOJC retreat.
Yeah. Something to look forward to, folks. Yeah.
What is your favorite quote?
One that I've always really loved, it's sort of from an African proverb, and I've seen different versions, but it's something like, until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And it's about sort of the power of storytelling and also who has the power to tell stories.
That's a really good one. And then last one, who is your role model and why?
Who is my role model? Oh, my goodness. Oh, gosh, that's such a weighty question. I should have studied up. I'm going to have to come back to you on that one. I feel like I ought to have a really wise answer to that. And
That's all right. Well, I wanted to start talking from the beginning of your journey to deanhood or deanship or whatever it's called. But I want to go back to your college years, because I think one of the most interesting and unique things about you coming in as interim dean of the SOJC is that you actually didn't study anything communications related throughout your higher education experience. So tell us a little bit about what you were studying and why you were interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I did kind of get to this a little bit indirectly, I guess. So when I was an undergraduate, I was a political science minor and a history major, and I happened to take a class on Central American politics. And then I had the opportunity while I was an undergrad, it might have actually been, well, in any case, I can't remember exactly the timeline, but I got a chance to go to Nicaragua with a group that was there to observe the presidential elections. And this was back in, I think, 1990. Mm-hmm. So this was a time when the leftist party, the Sandinistas, governed the country, the Revolutionary Party, and then they lost in a democratic election. And it was so fascinating to me to bring together what I'd learned about the region, but then especially there were some journalists on the trip with us. And it was fascinating to see the way that they told stories about what I was experiencing, what I was seeing with my own eyes, and how some of those stories seemed to me like really, faithful portrayals of what was really happening, and others seemed more like people were substituting maybe their own preconceptions about the region, preconceptions about the people in the country for the actual things that were going on that we were all experiencing. So it was a very intense window into storytelling, into journalism, into how we understand the world. And I got fascinated with that question of who gets to tell the stories that help us all make sense of what's happening in the world. So that really led me into the study of the field is called political communication. That's really been much of my career.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to talk about the fact that you originally had kind of a different plan for your higher education experience, and you might not have thought in high school that you were going to end up where you are now. So can you tell us a little bit about what went into the decision for you to go to college?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. And it's really interesting to think back on that when I was in high school, I really thought I was going to be a professional singer because I had a band in high school and I had taken voice lessons for several years, et cetera. And I loved music. And then I decided to kind of get myself into the vocal performance program at University of Colorado in Boulder, and got there and just was like instantly acutely aware of how out of place I was because it seemed that all the other students were really practicing to be operatic singers and kind of a different style, and I felt really out of my element. And it was a very uncomfortable year for me. And so I quit that and, moved back home, but quickly got bored and frustrated and realized, no, I really want to be in school. That just wasn't the right fit, right? So that's when I started just experimenting on a different university, different campus, just experimenting with classes in history and political science, and I think really found my passion.
Yeah. And you're also a first-generation college student, so your parents did not go to college. So what did it look like for you when you decided to actually go back and go as a history and political science student?
Yeah. It's a wee bit more interesting and complicated than that even. It's true that my dad had never gone to college. My mother, as a working single mom, probably in her, what would she have been, in her 50s at that point, went to get her undergrad, and it ended up that she and I were at the same campus. We were at what is now Metropolitan State University in downtown Denver, and that's where I grew up. And so we even took a class together.
Oh my gosh, I need to know what that was like.
It was, you can imagine, right? There were times when it was very fun and, kind of hilarious, as you can imagine. And we could help each other with our homework. So
that's so surreal. I really want to hear about, you had told me a story previously about when you graduated high school, a trip that you took that really affected the progress of your interests.
Yeah, my mom was so great in this way. She was like, when you graduate from high school, let's go have an adventure. And she took me to Europe. So we traveled Europe for a month. And that is really what then I think I looped back to. After that not great experience as a freshman in college in the vocal program, then realizing, no, what I got so interested in, what I was passionate about really was learning more about history and understanding more about the political world. And then I came to, discover storytelling, the power of media and journalism. So because of that trip, I think, and you know how it is. It's a kind of a cliche, but when you're in Europe and the history is all around you, so to speak, just being immersed in that for that month really was pretty life-changing.
Where did you go? What did you see specifically that
oh my
kind of
gosh,
hit you?
it's been such a long time ago now.
Because I feel like the usual experience is visiting Italy and seeing like Roman ruins, and you're like, this still is here.
Right.
And that's crazy.
Yeah, I do remember like visiting the Colosseum, right, in Rome, and just being like, your imagination just goes crazy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So after you got your bachelor's in history and political science, you continued your political science education by getting your master's at University of Colorado, Denver again. Is that right?
Yes, I did. That's where I got my master's.
And then you got your PhD in political science at the University of Washington, which we're going to try and forgive you for. But I'm curious, when you started shifting your attention towards media and communication within the sphere of political science.
Yeah, what happened there? Life is so serendipitous sometimes. So as I was thinking about graduate programs and sort of, starting that application process, I happened upon a book that's called News, the Politics of Illusion. And it's now in its umpteenth edition. I don't even know how many editions it's been in, authored by a scholar named Lance Bennett, who's at University of Washington. And I was so taken with this book because it was, again, these things that I had become fascinated in, like how journalists tell the stories of the world that most of us rely on to understand, especially things that we won't get to experience for ourselves, and kind of what are the norms, what are the routines, what are the pressures, et cetera, that can create sometimes accurate but sometimes distorted pictures of politics and the world. And I decided to reach out to him because I was thinking about University of Washington, and we connected when I went there on a visit, and I just felt that I had to learn from this person if I could. And then we really hit it off very well, and he became my mentor, has been the most important professional mentor to me, and we're actually still friends, and we actually edit a book series together now.
We can add him to the role model list.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yes. Why did I not think of that?
Well, I also want to know about the research that you were doing while you were a candidate for your PhD. And I think the timing of the research you were doing was also very interesting.
Yeah, I ended up doing my dissertation on news coverage of police use of force, police brutality. And that really, in part, was driven by the fact that the kind of infamous beating of the motorist Rodney King in Los Angeles happened when I was in graduate school, and watching how this event that certainly wasn't intended to become a news story, right? But because a bystander had videotaped it, it became an enormous news story that was impossible to get away from, and then set off all of these conversations, these discussions in the media, different kinds of stories and, commentary, et cetera, about what did this event mean? Is that a common experience, especially for Black Americans, or was it just an anomaly? What did the police think they were doing, et cetera? Watching all of that play out, I got super interested in what I would later come to think of as event-driven problem definition in the news, right? That there's an event that then journalists try to make sense of, and a lot of how they make sense of it will depend in part on who they talk to, who they call on as their sources. So that led me to study how newspapers in Los Angeles and New York City, two cities with police departments kind of infamous for not always very savory tactics, looking at the news coverage in those cities and how different incidents of police use of force had been covered. And of course found, not surprisingly, that it was almost always police and elected officials that got most of the opportunity to tell that story of what was happening.
And that ended up turning into a book. So you have this really extensive background in political science, and then you have scholarship looking at how the press and journalism have overlapped with political events, and then you have books that cover topics like police brutality, as well as gender politics and political campaigning, and a really huge and very discussed topic right now, the First Amendment. So I kind of want to know what your favorite topic has been to research, and what has drawn you to it, and what have you found out about it?
Oh my gosh. It's a wonderful question. I actually think that for me, all my books and articles are kind of like my children. And so I love them all. And what I have found, I think different scholars have different career trajectories. And for me, mine has not been sort of in a straight line. Like I was always interested in this one thing and then just only ever looked at that. I mean, there is a through line that, again, I'm interested in the stories that get told to us about the world and who gets to tell them.
I'll kind of rephrase the question. For each of these subtopics, have all of these been inspired by events that you've witnessed that you've then wanted to look at deeper? Is it more of a spontaneous, I guess, discovery of this is something that I really want to dive deeper into, or something that you've kind of thought about for a while and then eventually had that spark that lit it back up?
Right. Come to think of it, I think a lot of my work has been kind of event-driven or event-inspired, if you will. Like the book that I co-authored with Lance Bennett and another scholar named Steve Livingston, where we looked at news coverage throughout the first Gulf War, and especially the circumstances around the U.S. treatment of detainees in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was like still in the news as we were writing the book, right? And I think I like doing that. It kind of almost straddles the line between journalism and scholarship, that I'm trying to make sense of current events through a broader theoretical lens, or also using that to kind of build theory about how media, journalism, political communication work.
Absolutely. And after you graduated and you got your doctorate, you then kind of moved around quite a bit. You taught political science at Syracuse and Portland State, and then taught political communication specifically at Louisiana State, and then went to the School of Journalism at University of Texas, Austin, and then you finally found your way to the University of Oregon. So after moving around and all that back and forth, tell us how you actually ended up at the university, and how did the places that you worked at before all of those schools bring you here?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I have such a strange career path in that way. So just quickly, when I completed my dissertation and my doctorate, I was offered a job at Syracuse University, and it was really the only job that I was offered. So, you know, it's sort of like the Foreign Service, right? You kind of go where you have an opportunity when you're an academic. So from Syracuse, which I didn't love everything about living there, but it was an excellent program, excellent school, great opportunity. Got the chance to come to the Northwest again, which, you know, my husband and I had fallen in love with the Northwest when I'd been in graduate school, getting my doctorate at the University of Washington. I'm allowed to say those words. So we were based in Portland. I was at Portland State University for a number of years, but then I got recruited first to LSU, as you mentioned, and then to UT Austin. All along, all throughout that trajectory, I was always hoping and working toward the moment when we'd actually get to relocate, you know, for good in the Pacific Northwest, just because we love the environment here, the culture, the people, everything about it. So I was delighted to have the chance to come to the University of Oregon. That was very exciting and very gratifying.
I'm actually curious, from all of the different places, New York, Louisiana, Texas, Oregon, did you see any differences in terms of the way that journalism was approached, I guess, in each place, just geographically?
Yeah, I guess one thing I would say in response to that is that I think some other programs lean more into sort of the traditional aspects of journalism or the other areas like PR or advertising, et cetera. And what I've always really liked and appreciated about the SOJC is that this was a place where the professionals and the academics really are in conversation with each other. And that's not necessarily the case in all other schools, at least that I've seen. And that this was a place that was really focused on not just sort of teaching the fundamentals of journalism and the other fields, although that's really important, but how do these fields need to innovate? You know, what's gonna push all of this forward into the future, into a future that's much more complicated than kind of in the glory, you know, days of traditional journalism. So I've always been really drawn to that. I really do think that's something that makes the SOJC unique.
What were some of the innovations that you saw in the SOJC that stood out to you in comparison to the other places that you worked and studied?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think there's a couple of things that come immediately to mind. One on the journalism side, and we might talk more about the Agora Journalism Center, which is, not the only thing the SOJC is doing that's cool with journalism. It's just one of the things, but it really has become kind of a thought leader in the space of how does journalism need to innovate to become more, trustworthy and remain relevant for audiences. So that's one. But in the other areas, for example, in advertising, the SOJC has an amazing reputation in advertising, especially around creative strategy as a very unique contribution, a very unique approach to doing that work. Those things used to be kind of separate, like you had creative and you had strategy. And the insight, especially of my wonderful colleague, Deb Morrison, was to develop this idea of creative strategy, these two sides of the practice really working together. And especially, I think, a unifying theme for the SOJC that comes through in the creative strategy work that Deb has done, in the community-centered journalism work that the Agora Journalism Center has done, and so much else that we do, is really around innovating our practice for the benefit of the public, for social good, with an ethical grounding, with the grounding in values. And I do think that is one thing that sets the SOJC apart as well, is that we're not just, narrowly or thinly focused on careers. We're super oriented toward getting our students launched in amazing careers, but always with a basic grounding first. Finding your passion, learning those ethical viewpoints and approaches so that will guide your work as you move through your career. And that's where the innovation comes from. I think that's a really unique aspect of the SOJC.
Absolutely. I think that's also something that I've seen myself as a student, and I don't think we necessarily always realize as students, especially if we've been at the U of O and at the SOJC our entire student careers, that is actually something that is different and new and great.
Totally, yeah.
And when you joined the University of Oregon, you eventually became Associate Dean and Director of the SOJC's Agora Journalism Center, which is a research center.
It's actually, Agora is really a neat entity at the SOJC in Portland. It's both a research center, but also industry outreach, industry serving, industry thought leadership. So my wonderful colleague, Andrew DeVigal, who's based in Portland, now directs the Agora Journalism Center. And it was really, in many ways, it was his brainchild. So Agora began as a center devoted to what was at the time called engaged journalism, which now is kind of taken for granted in some ways, that journalism should be more engaged with its audiences, and then kind of shifted over time and kind of honed its strategic vision to be really dedicated to specifically community-centered journalism, which is really a set of practices to help journalists listen more carefully to the communities that they serve and allow themselves to be more driven by, so to speak, the concerns, the events, the happenings, the issues in those communities, and to learn techniques for facilitating dialogue and listening sessions, et cetera.
That's a perfect introduction into what I was going to ask you more specifically about, which was a research project that was done through the Agora Journalism Center, where you as research director worked with some grad students on two big studies that were assessing the status of local news outlets. And I would love for you to tell us about what that research entailed and what you found out from it, because it's a topic that we can learn a lot from.
Yeah, so in 2022, we released the first assessment of Oregon's local news and information ecosystem, so to speak. In that report, what we set out to do was to create a baseline understanding of simply how many local news outlets still exist across the state of Oregon. And it might sound so basic that, your listeners might think, well, why would you even need to do that? But you probably know that local journalism is really severely challenged right now by economics, the changing business model, it's harder and harder to make money at local news. And a lot of newsrooms are either cutting way back on the size of the newsroom, the frequency of their publication, the breadth of what they cover, or they're closing altogether. So we knew that we wanted to create a baseline so that then it would be possible to track over time what happens with local news across the state of Oregon. And then in 2025, this year, at the beginning of the year, we released an updated report where we went back through the database. We were able to document how many of those outlets still existed or had gone out of business or had been purchased or combined with others. And we did find there's a big percentage of local news outlets in Oregon, for example, that were bought by an out-of-state owner just in the past year. So now for the first time, Oregon has a significant chunk of local news outlets that are not owned by owners within the state anymore. And that's new for this state.
I want to know about the combination of the ever-changing status of local organizations and that engaged journalism that you were talking about. Is there a place where those two topics meet? What does engaged journalism do for local publications?
Yeah, great question. There really is a connection. I mean, on one hand, it's just good to know whether you care about community-centered journalism or not. It's just good to know what news outlets still exist and kind of how they're doing and be able to track them over time. But yeah, for us at the Agora Journalism Center, the connection is partly that we really believe that community-centered journalism techniques, approaches are part of the recipe for sustainability, part of the way of making sure that your news outlet remains really relevant to local readers. Because in this crowded media environment, when we all have 100 different choices of what to pay attention to at any one moment, why do we go to local news? Well, we go because it's the one way to know what's actually happening in our communities. And in this era where people are increasingly looking for trustworthiness and authenticity in information, then making sure that you're really keeping your coverage really in tune with the local community, we think is really important.
That was something that I was going to say was we're hearing a lot about people don't trust journalists anymore, or they don't trust publications and stations anymore. But it's been studied that they do trust community-focused reporting. And I also wanted to talk about the Political Communication Journal that you've been editing for the past 5 years. I'd love to just hear quickly what that journal is and the research that you're doing, which I think is really interesting, where you're actually kind of doing some reflective research.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the journal Political Communication, redundantly titled, is the flagship journal of the field of political communication, which one thing I've always loved about it is that it is interdisciplinary. Scholars from both of those fields, political science and communication, who are working together to run the journal, to serve on the editorial board, to serve as reviewers for the journal, etc. So political communication is a super interesting field because it covers a lot of different things. A lot of people, when they hear that, they think campaigns and elections, for example, and that is, a big chunk of what we publish in the journal are, studies of different aspects of election campaign communication, but there's so much more to it than that, right? There's press-state relations, how do governments try to manage media coverage? There's social media, of course, and everything that's happening there. And as we've moved from a, one-to-many communication model to a many-to-many communication model on social media, increasingly so much of what gets published in that journal is really actually looking at how people communicate with each other and with officials and politicians and influencers, et cetera. How do people arrive at their understandings of politics, their impressions, their political attitudes, et cetera. And there's a lot of other kind of subjects that get published in the journal as well. So it's super interesting. It's always fun for me whenever we get a new batch of manuscripts to kind of see what people are looking at. So yeah, one project I've been working on over the past year or so, maybe a little longer, in collaboration with a political science PhD student here from the University of Oregon, we've been going back and looking at what has our own journal been publishing on the general topic of democracy and democratic decline, or what's sometimes referred to as democratic backsliding, which is when more established democracies start experiencing challenges to their democratic institutions, which we see happening today in the U.S. and many other parts of the world. We want to understand, is our own field at all on top of what's happening with that? How much are we lagging behind what's happening in the real world? Because what we think is that the field has tended to treat democracy as kind of a given in countries that we think of as democracies. But actually, of course, those democratic institutions are being challenged quite significantly. So we wanted to see what's been being published on that in our own journal, just as a way of starting, right?
Which is so cool. I feel like I've never really heard of a journal or publication really looking at its own content.
Right.
And I think that's a really cool and interesting way to conduct research. And I think what you said about this idea that we assume that democracy is a given, especially in the US, I think is also extremely interesting and very clear. It's very obvious. But the big news is that you've been named the interim dean for the SOJC for the next year. So you're here for a short time, but I really want to know what it means for you to take on this role and what you're hoping to bring to the SOJC from your own background that other deans have not brought because of their own backgrounds, for example.
That's a good question. It's like, I seriously mean it. It's really an honor to get to serve in this role because it's a fantastic group of faculty, staff, students. Like, I can't say enough good things about the people that I get to work with every day. So I've really been enjoying it. And I do think a couple of things that I bring. I do have a stronger academic background. I'm not trained as a professional journalist or a professional communicator per se, but I think that can be helpful and valuable because we are in an academic institution and there's a whole set of norms and processes and procedures and policies, et cetera, that are inherent in a university that I feel that I understand pretty well after spending my life in higher ed. And another thing I think is having been in Portland, but also having been pretty closely involved in certain aspects of the SOJC in Eugene for a decade now, I feel like I have an understanding of the two campuses. I think it's given me a closer understanding of how our professional master's programs work because those are mostly based in Portland at this point. And just has given me an eye toward how are we always engaged in trying to build more bridges? How are we always engaged in trying to strengthen our community? So I think those are some of the things that I'd bring. In terms of what I'm looking forward to, I think the interim role is unique. It's special, right? Because, you're term limited to a year from day one. And so you have to think hard about, well, what can you really accomplish? What do you really have a mandate to try to accomplish? So I don't think it's a time to come in with like big ideas about brand new initiatives, for example, right? It's a time, I think right now for the SOJC in particular, to focus on that community building, to focus on centering us, kind of re-grounding us after a really difficult couple of years. And in a moment when all of our professions that we serve are challenged, acutely challenged, economically, technologically, socially, politically, right? Changing news and information habits are upending traditional ways of doing things. And so in that moment, it does seem like it's important for us to just pause, take a breath, build our community with one another, and then create more common ground for thinking together in the future about, what does the school need to really focus on?
What does the school really need to focus on?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that are obvious. I mean, traditional models of education are changing. Traditional demand for things like undergraduate degrees and master's degrees, that's all changing. So everything from rethinking certain ways of how we teach undergraduates and the kinds of programs and specialties and experiences that we offer, I think we have to really lean into experiential learning. It's already a strength of our program, but we have to lean into it harder because our students, I don't have to tell you this, our students are facing a challenging job market to enter into. And so it's the experiential learning opportunities on top of the foundational classwork that's going to make our graduates stand out on the job market. And then I think, an obvious one in terms of technological changes is AI. And I don't think that we're yet anywhere near really understanding how it's going to shape what we do, both, how we teach, how we deliver our programs, but also what our graduates, the world that they are entering into and the professions that they're entering into. So I think AI is got to be a top priority for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're very excited to see what you end up accomplishing in the less than a year that we have you. But at the end of every one of our episodes, Regina, we ask our guests to share one cool story with us, whether that be a cool story from research that you've done, places that you've visited, or just really incredible opportunities that you've had. So, that being said, what cool story do you have for us today?
I don't know if this is a story, but it's a thing about me that people might not know, which is the most interesting thing about me. Has not to do with me, but is actually my husband. He's a chocolatier, and he has a chocolate business, and he made beautiful handmade artisanal chocolates. And that makes all social encounters really easy for me if he's there, because people don't want to talk to me. They don't want to talk about journalism and political communication. They want to talk about chocolate, right?
That's amazing. Well, you have to shout out where he's making the chocolate now. What's his
called? So his business is called Wildwood Chocolate.
And is it here in Eugene now?
It's based in Portland.
Oh, amazing. Mm-hmm. Well, now I want to get him on the podcast. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us your stories and your work and your life and career and everything you've done. Again, we're really excited to have you in the SOJC and really grateful to have had you on the podcast. This was a really incredible opportunity for me. I know I'm grateful. And it's been really great learning about you. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Well, now I really want some chocolate. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of One Cool Story, Tales from the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear more, find us wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. To stay up to date on what's happening at the SOJC, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Blue Sky at UOSOJC. From Allen Hall, I'm Julia Boboc. See you next time.